Hi everyone, Dave Klain here with that long promised video on purchasing an airplane, how I bought November 130 Mike Sierra, my MU-2 Marquise, and what the process is involved in doing so, and some tips and suggestions. Now to start, buying an airplane is a big decision and it is a big financial commitment. For most people, it is the largest financial commitment they'll make in their lives, the largest purchase that they'll make other than buying a home. And in some cases, buying that airplane might actually be more expensive than the home that they bought. So it's something that you don't go into on a whim. You've really got to research it and look into it to make sure that you make a good, smart, sound decision and that you're doing it for the right reasons and getting something that you're going to be happy with. So let's talk about buying an airplane. When you're going to go through it in a very formal, deliberate process, regardless of how big or small that purchase might be. You might be buying a small, older two-seat training airplane for $25,000 or $30,000, or you might be buying that brand new jet that's going to cost you $60 or $70 million. The process is fundamentally the same. And not surprisingly, it's very similar to the process when you buy a boat or when you buy a house. There's three phases. You have the pre-purchase phase, you have the purchase phase, and then you have the post-purchase phase. And the pre-purchase phase is all about two things. First of all, deciding on the kind of plane you're going to purchase. Secondly, is searching for and locating the plane, the actual plane that you're going to purchase. So again, to put this in home purchase comparison, the first one is deciding what kind of home you're going to purchase. Are you going to get a townhouse or a single family home? Are you going to get an apartment or a condominium? On an airplane perspective, you're talking about what make and model of airplane do you want to buy. And doing that requires two things. First of all, you need a needs analysis, which is what do I need? What am I looking for? And secondly is the mission analysis, which are what are the kinds of flights I'm going to do? Because the airplane might meet all of your needs perfectly in terms of the number of seats and all that kind of stuff. But if it can't fly the kinds of flights you intend to fly, that's a problem. For example, you might get a very well-priced, nice four-seat airplane that is equipped with instruments so that you can fly it in instrument meteorological conditions, in IMC, IFR flying. On the other hand, if you've got a business requirement or a requirement that you can fly no matter what the weather is, meaning icing and that kind of stuff, you're going to need an aircraft that has known icing protection, and that's a different capability that you're going to have to include in your search. So doing that needs analysis is about determining the kind of airplane you're looking for, what your needs are. How many seats do you need? How much cargo do you have to be able to carry? What are the characteristics of the airplane you're looking for? Do you need something that can operate from grass strips? Do you need something that can operate from the water, a seaplane or a float plane? Are you looking for something that can take off from short runways because you know where you're going to base and there's a maximum runway length, and that's a factor. Do you have to be able to operate from high altitude airports, or are you going to be flying from sea level? That's that needs analysis. Now the mission analysis is the kind of flights you're going to do. If your regular flight is something that requires you to be able to go at least 600 miles, well then having an airplane with only 400 miles of range doesn't make sense because you're going to have to make a fuel stop each and every time you make that trip. So the kind of flying, the kind of missions you're going to fly is as important as the characteristics of the airplane, and they go into defining the kind of airplane you're going to get. I mentioned, are you flying for business where you need that all-weather capability, you need known icing capability so that you can actually go most of the time, acknowledging that sometimes the weather's so bad that you're not going to go no matter what kind of airplane you have. There are times when even the airliners don't fly because the weather is simply too bad. But there's a big difference between that all-weather IMC, known ice certified, high-performance airplane and the airplane that's really a daytime VFR, flying around the patch or flying 50 or 100 miles away to get that hamburger run. Very different kinds of airplane, very different kinds of flying, and both of them can be great flying. But you need to determine what do you need the majority of the time so that you buy the kind of airplane you need. So once you've done that needs analysis and the mission analysis, you're going to start closing in on what you need. Is it a single or a multi-engine? Is it going to be equipped for that weather? Is it going to be equipped for IMC? How many seats is it going to have? What kind of range? What kind of speed? All the things that go into that. So then you're going to actually start researching different models and trying to determine what are the things that I'm looking for. The beauty of the internet is there's an incredible amount of information out there that didn't used to be there. When I bought my first airplane almost 20 years ago, resources like the internet really didn't exist the way they do today. There were yearly issues put out by most of the major aviation magazines which talked about things like what are all the models for a category, or they'd have one issue which was focused on what are the top singles, what are the top high performance singles, what are the top multi-engines, and that kind of thing. But you really had to do research in a different way. But these days you've got the internet. You can very easily look up different kinds of aircraft, do a search, and get information on their performance characteristics that helps you start filtering it down. So in my case, when I bought 130 Mike Sierra, I'd already owned another airplane, I'd been through the process, and so I had a pretty good feeling for what I wanted. I'd done my mission analysis, I'd done my needs analysis, and what I was looking for was a cabin class airplane with at least 6 seats, which had a range of at least 1,000 miles, and preferably was going to be a turboprop because I wanted the reliability and power that was available from turbine engines as compared to piston engines if I could make the financial numbers work out correctly. So that led me to a fairly limited number of things. On the single engine turboprop, the one option was the Pilatus, and on the multi-engine turboprops, the real options that were viable were the Beech King Air, the Piper Cheyenne, and the Mitsubishi MU-2. And so that's what I really did my research on. And I did a lot of research. I looked more online at those 3 models. I took a look at what their characteristics were because there are different models even amongst them. The King Air has the small model, the 90 or the 90 variant. There's the 200 or the 250 variant, and then the 300 or the 350 variant, which are increasing size, capability, and performance, but also increasing cost. The Piper Cheyenne doesn't have that kind of stepping, but the Piper Cheyenne does have different models that were produced throughout the years and some significant changes between them, especially when you get to the 400. And the MU-2 has primarily 2 different models. They've got the short body and the long body. So those were the 3 that I was researching. I then went back to the internet. I read online reviews for all 3 aircraft, and while some of them were no longer in production, the reviews from when they were in production and were being reviewed as new aircraft were available and findable online. And then I looked into type groups, and I was able to find online internet groups that specialized in those aircraft, and they were for the owners and the operators of those airplanes. And so I joined them, and they're all very welcoming, and I was able to get information from people who currently own and operate and maintain those airplanes and find out what the current story is, what's the current situation. I was able to learn more about the aircraft. It's incredibly useful resources. Many of them have online forums, or they've got an online mailing list, or both. What were the things I was trying to learn about as I was making these decisions and doing my research? Well, first of all, what are the actual performance specifications versus the book performance specifications? We all know that there's a difference between the two, especially when we talk older used aircraft. So you want to know what's realistic. I wanted to learn what are things to look out for in that airplane, in that specific model. Some of them have known problems or things that when you're doing a pre-buy, you should look for to make sure it's not there, or that an inspection's been conducted to ensure that you're not going to get a surprise later on. And that goes into what are the relevant airworthiness directives for the airplanes you're looking at. Many airworthiness directives are a one-time inspection. They get signed off and taken care of, and you never worry about them again. But especially when you get to the larger cabin class aircraft, there are airworthiness directives which have a recurring periodicity to perform that inspection. And sometimes that inspection can be quite intrusive and quite expensive. And so knowing that up front lets you know, has it been completed? When is it due next? And how much is that going to cost me? That goes into your factor, and that goes into the value of the airplane. I had the chance to talk to owners, learn about what their ownership experience was like, and I reached out to people that I saw on the internet who were active on the forums or the mailing lists, and I sent them a direct message and asked if I could email them or call them and ask questions. Without fail, they were unhesitating in sharing their time and their knowledge and their expertise, and I feel it made me a more informed purchaser and made my search more effective. If you can, you want to take the advantage and actually fly in one. What's it like to fly in? How's the noise? How's the comfort? Does it work for you? And that's invaluable. You also want to talk to brokers. There are brokers who specialize in different kinds of airplanes. There are people who specialize in the Cessna cabin class airplanes. There are people who specialize in King Airs, people who specialize in MU-2s. They have incredible knowledge about the overall market, the airplanes in general. What are the things to look for? What are the things that make them more valuable or less valuable? And they're often very much willing to share their knowledge with you in advance of having a contract or you hiring them, just because they're looking to maintain their business and they're looking, to be honest, to pick you up as a client. So take advantage of them. These are men and women who may have 20, 30, 40 years of experience with that kind of airplane, and you're simply not going to be able to match that no matter how much research you do. So that's a resource that you can get really good information out. And you can also get some information on pricing. What really goes into the pricing of an airplane and that specific airplane? What are the differences between various models or various years that can have an impact on price, or other factors that you may not know about because you just don't know. In the case of MU-2s in particular, there are some big factors on pricing. And for all turbines, I'd say the biggest one, and I didn't realize this going into it, was the number of hours on the engine. That drives everything, because the engines represent, if not the entire value of the airplane, the predominant value of the airplane. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of that value is almost a math formula based on how many hours are on the engine and when is it due for overhaul. And that gets into that information that you can get from owners and brokers, because it turns out on the MU-2, which has the TPE 331-10 engines for the Marquise, which I bought. 130 Mike Sierra is a Marquise. There are two inspection regimes. One of them has a 5,400 hour overhaul period. One of them has a 5,000 hour overhaul period. Now, at first glance, you say, oh, it makes sense. The 5,400 hours, I get an extra 400 hours. It makes financial sense, and that's what I want to get. But what you won't know unless you talk to somebody and you understand the math behind it is that there are two hot section inspections that are required between 0 hours and 5,400 hours on that -10 engine. However, if you elect to put it on the 5,000 hour cycle, there is only one hot section inspection required at 2,500 hours. The last thing you want to do while you're doing this research, because it's a big one, is insurability. Unless you plan to buy the airplane outright and you're not going to insure it, you need to verify, can you get insurance in that airplane? So you can contact various underwriters. There are plenty of brokers out there, but there's only a couple of companies that actually provide aviation insurance in the United States. So all the brokers work with all the companies in general. And you can get an estimate for a person of your experience, how much is it going to cost to insure an airplane? And so in my case, I contacted my broker and I said, look, I'm thinking about buying a cabin class turbine, and I'd just like you to give me a ballpark number. What would it cost me to insure for an airplane that was worth roughly $500,000, a Beech King Air 200, and an MU-2 Marquise? Because I had to give them something to plug into it. And I got numbers. Now, what did surprise me was, given the history of the MU-2, I thought that the MU-2 insurance would be more expensive. In fact, it was less insurance than the King Air by about $100. And I confirmed that, number one, I was insurable, and the insurance company in either case was going to require me to go through the appropriate training, which was a non-issue with respect to the MU-2, because the MU-2 has an SFAR, special federal aviation regulation, applied to getting training in the MU-2 before you're allowed to legally fly it. So in the case of the MU-2, you've got to get the training, and you're going to do initial training and annual recurrency training. In the case of other airplanes, the FAA doesn't require it, but I'm telling you, in almost all the cases, the insurance company is probably going to require you to get some kind of annual training and initial training to get checked out, unless you've got a lot of experience in that airplane. So that's all the research phase, trying to figure out what you want to buy. So I did all of that, and I started out, as I said, looking at the King Air, the MU-2, and the Piper Cheyenne. And what I came down to was that I thought I wanted to get an MU-2. One of the things that I did as part of this that really helped lock that down for me, I mentioned going for a flight with an airplane. Well, there were no MU-2s near me, but I contacted a broker who also offers instruction in the MU-2. He's one of the instructors that multiple people told me he knows more about MU-2s than anybody out there. He's got over 13,000 hours in them. He's been flying them for decades. He happens to be a broker on the side, but his big thing is MU-2 training. And I had spoken to that gentleman multiple times. Well, he was incredibly helpful. And I asked him, any chance I could come out there to see an MU-2 and maybe kind of get a feel for what it's like? And he said, absolutely. Why don't we set up when we've got an initial training session going on, and you can come out and you can actually talk to me. You can actually sit in on some of the classroom sessions for a little bit, and we'll go fly in an MU-2. And so one spring day, I hopped on a flight first thing in the morning and flew from Washington Dulles out to Nashville, Tennessee. And Mr. Reese Howell of Howell Enterprises met me at the airport, drove me to Smyrna, where his operation is based, and we spent about an hour and a half talking MU-2s and talking about the different models and what the characteristics were and what was good and bad and what were the factors that I should be thinking about as I went to buy. Then I sat in on a ground classroom session for about an hour. Then we had lunch, and I got a chance to not only pick Reese and the classroom instructor's brains, but I also got to talk to the two people going through the class and learn a little bit about them, what their background was and why they bought the MU-2 and if they were happy with it or not. Then after lunch, Reese and I went for a flight. And I'll tell you, I went out there thinking, I think an MU-2 probably looks pretty good, but I wasn't sure. After 30 minutes, I was 100% convinced that I wanted an MU-2. The performance was so much better than what I'd seen in King Airs or Piper Cheyennes that it just put them to shame. And you really can read everything in the reports and have people tell you things, but until you actually get out there and experience it, you just don't understand. And because I was flying with Reese, I was in the left seat, he's an instructor, he was in the right seat, we were able to do things that you might not do with an owner who's just giving you a flight around. We shut down one of the engines, and we flew around on one engine for a while. We shot some approaches, including a single engine approach. It gave me a chance to really see how stable that airplane was, how well it performed on one engine, and alleviated a lot of concerns from the rumors and the stories that people put out about the MU-2. So I walked out of there realizing, yes, I wanted an MU-2. I wanted a long body because I haven't seen a long and short body. I realized that the long body, the space and everything just worked better for my family, what my mission needs were. And lastly, if at all possible, I wanted a Marquise. There's an old saying that says, when you look at an airplane and you want to know what's wrong with it, take a look at the next model and see what the manufacturer changed. Because often what they're doing is implementing improvements to problems or things that just weren't ideal in that earlier model. But the characteristics of the Marquise were what I wanted if I could make the numbers work and I could find one that would work in my price. So I finished the first part of the pre-purchase phase. I'd done my analysis and done my search and determined what kind of airplane I wanted to buy. And I now knew a make, the Mitsubishi, and a model, the Marquise, that I wanted to buy. So now it was time to enter the search phase, finding that specific airplane that I was going to buy. Now there's a lot of ways to do this. A lot of people rely on a buyer's broker. They hire a person who's an expert in searching for and buying airplanes, who has all the contacts, and you're going to pay for that, but you get the benefit of hiring an expert to represent your interests, because a selling broker, make no mistake about it, is interested in selling that airplane and representing the needs of the seller. In my case, I spoke to a number of brokers. I made the decision not to go for a buyer's broker. Now, what was my reason for doing that? Well, the reality was that the MU-2 community is very small. There aren't that many airplanes out there. And so I didn't really think that I was going to get that much benefit over having somebody represent my interests. I was very comfortable in terms of pricing. I knew what I had to do in terms of inspections, and I felt with the research and the advice I'd gotten, I knew enough to be able to determine whether an airplane would meet my needs or not, and whether it was a good plane or not. That may not always be the case. You may not feel comfortable doing that, and there's nothing wrong with using a buyer's broker. It's like everything in life. It's a trade-off. You can either give of your own time, or you can reduce the amount of time you have to do by spending money and hiring somebody to do it for you. But there's no free lunch. You've got to go one way or the other. Now, searching for an airplane, back in the old days, and when I bought my first airplane, Trade-A-Plane was a huge thing. And you'd look online, or not online, you'd look in this weekly newspaper that came out, and you'd see all the listings, these classified listings, and find it. That's not how you find airplanes anymore these days. The primary way is searching on the internet. There are plenty of listings out there. It's the great equalizer. There's all kinds of websites out there. Controller.com is a particularly good one because they're free and they give you access to a lot of listings. And the other thing they've got is a great search engine. And you can set up alerts so when a new airplane comes on the market or gets posted there, you'll be notified and you'll get an email. So I thought I had an account there. I signed up there, and that was very useful. Of course, I knew what brokers specialized in MU-2s, and so I was checking their websites, and they were constantly updating and posting their inventory, so I knew what was out there. And that was helpful. Now, the other thing I did was I put the word out that I was looking for an MU-2. I did it on the MU-2 owners mailing list and said, hey, everybody, just so you know, I'm actively looking for an MU-2. I'm really looking for a Marquise. And if anybody's got one you're thinking about selling, please reach out to me. There are times when an owner is thinking about selling but hasn't made the decision to do it yet, or wants to sell but is not listed with a broker because he doesn't want to eat that much money in the broker's commission. So those unlisted opportunities can really save you some money. It's kind of like somebody selling their house and it's for sale by owner instead of being represented by a realtor. Now, in my case, I located an airplane through an owner who was selling it. He had not listed it with a broker yet. He had it available he had not even listed it anywhere on a website. So nobody knew the plane was for sale. But he and I established contact and determined that, yeah, that looked like it would work for us. We could both save some money on the deal, and the plane seemed to meet my needs. So the next step was really to figure out was this going to be the airplane for me?
Well, that wraps up part 1 of this video. In covering the material, I realized that the video was going to be far too long unless I broke it up. So we've stopped here at the end of the pre-purchase phase and pick it up in part 2, where you'll see how we actually went through the purchase process and then the post-purchase actions necessary to really make it my airplane. Stay tuned for that, and I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to keep up to date with videos that are going on. Drop me a comment or note and let me know what you're thinking. Give me some feedback and give me suggestions for future videos. Stay safe, fly safe, and don't forget to aviate, navigate, and communicate.